They started whispering about Margaret Thompson before the snow ever fell, because nothing unsettles a town faster than a woman who refuses to explain herself. At 60 years old, widowed and alone on a quiet stretch of land outside Aspen, she woke before sunrise and worked until her body trembled, dragging stones heavier than her own grief across frozen soil. Her hands were split open, knuckles bruised raw, blood drying beneath dirt that never fully washed away, yet she never slowed. The wall rose day by day, stones stacked with deliberate care, forming a barrier no one asked for and no one understood. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, murmuring theories about loneliness and loss, about a mind cracked by sorrow. When the first snow dusted the ground, those murmurs sharpened into judgment. They said she had snapped after her husband died, that grief had twisted into obsession. But Margaret didn't build faster because she was unraveling. She built faster because time felt like something hunting her. Dorothy, her closest neighbor, finally crossed the fence line with a voice heavy with pity and concern, asking what madness drove her to exhaustion, reminding her that William wouldn't want this. Margaret paused, breath fogging the air, eyes burning with more than cold, and said only that she knew exactly what she was doing. She didn't explain the letters hidden throughout the house, sealed instructions meant for moments that hadn't arrived yet. She didn't describe the blueprints tucked away in the shed, drawn by a man whose mind had never betrayed him even as his heart failed. She returned to the stones because explaining would only make her sound insane, and insanity was easier for them than the truth. The truth was that William had spent his life studying patterns most people ignored, and before he died, he had left her a promise wrapped in trust. As the snow thickened and the wall climbed higher, Margaret worked not to keep the world out, but to hold something together that everyone else believed had already fallen apart. When her sister-in-law arrived, polished and disapproving as ever, the accusations sharpened into intervention. Beatrice spoke of concern while her eyes measured the land, the house, the wall, calculating costs Margaret didn't know were being counted. She talked about grief like a diagnosis, about acceptance as if it were surrender, and questioned the sanity of instructions written by a dying man. Margaret felt anger flare, not because William had been doubted, but because his life's work was being dismissed as delirium. He had been ill, yes, but illness never touched his mind. He had been a meteorologist for decades, a man who trusted data over comfort, patterns over hope. When Beatrice suggested selling the property and moving closer to civilization, Margaret heard something beneath a concern, something urgent and rehearsed. She refused, firmly, and returned to the wall as if each stone were an answer she didn't need to speak. Nights were worse. Alone in the quiet house William had built with his hands, Margaret reread the first letter until the paper softened at the folds. It spoke of storms unseen, of winds stronger than memory, of winters that returned not randomly but cyclically, patiently, like predators waiting for the right season. It told her she would be doubted, isolated, pressured, and that none of it meant she was wrong. When her son Robert arrived unannounced, alarm written across his face, she recognized the same fear others carried, shaped differently by love. He saw the wall and saw obsession, saw her exhaustion and mistook it for a collapse. Their argument cut deeper than the cold, words landing like blows as he spoke of sickness and confusion and responsibility. Margaret listened, crying not because he challenged her, but because he didn't yet understand that trusting William wasn't denial, it was devotion. When she finally showed him the plans, the equations, the sealed letters labeled for futures that hadn't unfolded yet, doubt flickered. In his eyes, he was an engineer. He recognized precision when he saw it, and for the first time since William died, Margaret felt less alone. The pressure intensified as whispers became plans, and concern turned procedural. A psychiatrist appeared uninvited, escorted by Beatrice's insistence that this was for Margaret's own good. The implication was clear and chilling. Grief could be leveraged. Independence reframed as instability. Property wrestled away under the language of care. Margaret's anger erupted, not from fear, but betrayal. When the doctor spoke gently of assessments and evaluations, she saw through the performance. This wasn't about health. It was about control. Robert, torn between caution and loyalty, finally stood beside her, drawing a line that had been too long delayed. After they left, Margaret's hand shook as she opened another letter. One William had instructed her to read only if someone tried to take her from the house. The words felt freshly written, as if he had anticipated the exact cadence of this moment. He warned her of sudden interest, of relatives bearing urgency, of offers that would arrive cloaked in kindness. He directed her to a hidden safe she hadn't known existed, behind a painting she had dusted for years. Inside were documents that changed everything. Evidence of a massive tourism development planned for the region, with her land sitting squarely at its center. The offers Beatrice mentioned weren't generous. They were predatory. The commission promised to Beatrice alone was equal to what she had claimed the property was worth. Margaret didn't cry when she understood the truth. She went very still. William hadn't just predicted the weather. He had predicted people. Robert contacted the lawyer William trusted, and with every confirmation, the narrative shifted. Margaret wasn't being protected. She had been targeted. And suddenly, the wall wasn't just against wind and snow. It was against those who believed grief made her defenseless. As legal pressure mounted and the truth surfaced, the sky began to change. Subtle at first, then unmistakable. Birds vanished. Dogs grew restless. The air thickened with a weight that made breathing feel deliberate. Robert, now fully invested, unearthed historical records from 1965, then 1905, then earlier still, uncovering a brutal 60-year cycle of catastrophic winters dismissed by modern models to narrow to see beyond recent decades. When the local meteorologist returned, pale and shaken, admitting equipment anomalies he couldn't explain, Margaret didn't feel vindicated. She felt urgency. The storm, William predicted, wasn't theoretical anymore. It was approaching fast. 3 days, that was all they had. Margaret opened the final letter on the eve of the storm, William's voice steady on the page, telling her she had done enough, that the wall would hold, that she was stronger than anyone believed. Neighbors arrived frightened and apologetic. Families seeking refuge, bringing blankets and fear and trust. Margaret welcomed them without bitterness. The wall closed at last as snow began to scream across the valley. When the storm hit, it came with violence that erased roads, collapsed roofs, and swallowed the town in white chaos. Winds tore at everything unanchored, but the stone wall broke the force, redirected the fury, held fast. For 3 days they waited, listening to the world batter itself against preparation. When silence finally returned, the wall still stood. Lives were saved. The widow they called mad became the reason families went home alive. In the aftermath, journalists came, then scientists, then officials who suddenly wanted to understand what they had dismissed. Margaret never called herself a hero. She said only that she trusted her husband. Beatrice faded into legal consequences and quiet shame. The development project collapsed under investigation. Robert stayed, choosing proximity over ambition, rediscovering what he had nearly lost. William's work gained recognition. His methods, studied seriously for the first time. Margaret remained in the house, tending the land, maintaining the wall not as a monument, but as a reminder. When asked what she learned, she said this: "Sometimes the world calls you crazy when you are simply early. And sometimes love leaves instructions long after the voice is gone." If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something real, take a moment to like this video, subscribe for more stories that linger, and share your thoughts below, because the stories worth telling are the ones we almost ignore until it's too late.